All right, good jam. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NFL Strategy Show, matchups edition for the divisional round weekend. We're getting close to the end, fellas, so let's soak all of this in and have some fun today. Can't even say buckle your seatbelts. Can't say this is the marathon matchups edition. It might end up being that, but as of now, probably not. 4 games, not 14 games, but nonetheless, we're here to break all of them down, hit on all of the injuries, everything that we're looking at, try and get as deep into the weeds as we have to, so that if you are the type of person that only has time to watch one show a week, hopefully this is where you'll come each and every week. And then next year we'll run it back and do the exact same thing. So I'm Dave Loughran at Loughy_D, Loughy_D for those of you podcast listeners, joined as always by Matthew Savoca at Draftaholic on Twitter. Matt, what's good, brother?
Hey, doing well. This is the last week where we can call it any sort of a run, right? It's usually a marathon, this a sprint, but after it's just 2 games, we're just like we're walking through, right? So at least we're running still with a 4-game slate. Excited to dig into this one. And I'm sorry, Cincinnati, Tennessee. You guys, I know Tennessee's been there for a few years, but that feels like the Thursday night football game of these matchups compared to the more storied franchises. Excited to dig into this one as well.
Damn right, man. Yeah, I'm a little tired today. You know, I play hockey every Wednesday, and now they're scheduling our games late as shit. Like 9:30. Next week is 10:10. So, honestly, man, when Justine left for work this morning, and I felt like such a loser doing this, but I mean, did it anyway. When she left for work this morning and took our daughter to daycare, I went back to sleep, Matt, because it needed to be done. She left at like 7:45. I said, you know, I'm going to go pull another hour so I can be ready for the matchup show. You got to be refreshed when you're doing the matchup show, man.
got to be hyped up. You got to be caffeinated. I know people are in chat and they're maybe less hyped than usual. We don't have a 13 game slate here, but I know everyone's got their substances of choice here. So I'm glad that you got your needed rest for this exciting 4-game slate.
Yeah, absolutely. Cincinnati, Tennessee, San Francisco, Green Bay, Rams, Tampa. That's going to be fun. Buffalo, Kansas City. I was thinking about it this morning before I fell back into a 1+ hour slumber, Matt, that the Saturday games are going to be a lot of fun, but to wrap up the weekend with Buffalo, Kansas City in a 54-point total game, can't ask for more than that. I have a sneaky suspicion, and this isn't really saying anything that everyone else isn't thinking already, but last week we had some bad games. Buffalo, New England, shit. Tampa Bay, Philly. At no point was that game competitive. What was the other one that was? Rams, Arizona on Monday night. Terrible. And even Dallas, San Francisco. Sure, they had a chance to tie it up down a score late. But that game, I mean, they were down multiple scores for the majority of that game. So even San Francisco, as a 6-point dog, has a shot to win this out there in the frozen tundra in Green Bay. Every one of these games could be pretty damn good this week.
Oh, absolutely. And I was kind of saying that Cincinnati and Tennessee feels like the Thursday night game, but that's only because these teams over the last decade or so have not been competitive. These teams are certainly competitive this year. And yeah, like you said, the wild card matchups didn't give us a lot of drama here. So I kind of feeling like we're lulled into a sense of this could be another boring weekend. I don't think that's going to be the case. I mean, I keep seeing that image of Stephon Diggs last year where he stayed on the field and watched Kansas City celebrate in the AFC Championship to go to the Super Bowl, or it was in the AFC divisional round. I forget when they were eliminated last year, but I want to see that revenge game. I don't care about that earlier season matchup. They were waiting for this moment this Sunday night. And yeah, someone mentioned in chat, are we going to talk about the Saturday slate versus the Sunday slate? Most of my information today is based on the 1-game slates, just because it's daily fantasy. That's really what we're doing here. We can mention it over the course of the 2-game slate, but that's really where I'm focused personally.
By 1-game slate, you mean full games slate?
No, 1 game meaning like the Saturday slate I have information about, and I'm comparing players amongst the Saturday players, and then the Sunday slate, I'm comparing them amongst the Sunday players. But we can do both. I definitely have the tools for both.
Okay, yeah, because DraftKings, the big DraftKings contest is Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, then let's dig into that.
We can do both. We can do whatever. Yeah. I'm prepared for any of them because DraftKings didn't release salaries until 11:01 on Tuesday when I had a first look show to do. So I had gone through Yahoo for the Saturday and DraftKings or FanDuel for the Saturday. I mean, I'm not going to hit on really anything for the Sunday individual slate, but definitely Saturday I have a lot for. So let's dive into it. Before we do, El Negro Loco. I hear you, man. You don't feel good doing it, right? But once you get back in the bed, it is the right move, whether it's a slimy one or not. I mean, she's still going to be at work, right? I'm still going to be working a little bit later on in the day. You just got to do it. Spencer said, "Did Loughy hear Jared Goff named his son Jack? That'd be a power move, Spencer. Say that name out loud, Jordan." And we had one more. Jordan Vanek, our boy Jordan Vanek. Dave looks like a dude that's still overly competitive in hockey. Definitely spends a lot of time in the box. I don't. No, because I don't want to lose shifts. You know what I mean? Plus, I'm still pretty good. So I'd rather be out there. I don't want to be a hindrance on the team. All right, you ready to do this, man?
You're implying that you might be a liability on your hockey team? Dare you?
If I'm in the box. If I'm in the box because I'm not out there producing. You know what I mean?
Fair.
We had a sub We had a sub last week and got smoked. Came in this week, got a big win, blew them out. So I'm not saying I'm the reason. I'm just saying. All right. Cincinnati, Tennessee. Cincinnati 3.5-point dogs against the Titans. Kind of a fun game because Titans had the bye, clinched the number 1 overall seed, and in doing so, gave star running back Derrick Henry a little bit of time to a little bit of additional time to recuperate here. He had contact practice the other day. There's no way. I know Mike Vrabel keeps kind of leaving us in suspense. There is no way Derrick Henry doesn't play this week. I'm saying it right now. I'll even go as far, and I'll take the L. Feel free. Tweet me at Loughy_D. Tell me I'm an idiot if I'm wrong. I'm willing to bet that he gets the large majority of the workload in the event that he's active, which I think he will be. But let's kick it off with Cincinnati and start with, well, Joe Mixon, who in his first playoff game was underwhelming, but still was the clear lead back. I mean, Samaje Perine had one rushing attempt. There was nobody else really involved at all. Joe Mixon just didn't do a ton and kind of didn't need to.
Right. The game script didn't really require him to do a ton. I was actually surprised. I was pretty heavily invested in Joe Mixon, so that didn't really work out last week. And the game script here doesn't bode well. I mean, they're 3.5 point underdogs right now. We don't typically play running backs, even ones that are bell cow running backs on teams on the road who are underdogs here. But I do think Joe Mixon is viable here, either on the 1 game or the 2 game slate, mainly because so many people are going to be focused on Derrick Henry. I don't think it's necessarily a fish play to look at this and say, not only does Derrick Henry play, but if he plays, he's getting 25 total opportunities. That is going to push up the public's ownership of Derrick Henry, the excitement of being able to play him. And then, therefore, not owning Joe Mixon on the other side is going to be somewhat popular as well. So I think he does make for a pretty good contrarian play, especially because he has an outside chance of 25 total opportunities himself. You really need work in the passing game or in the red zone here. And, his 16 total touchdowns lets you know that this is a player that they will prioritize if they get here. It's not like Tennessee's defense is a world-beating defense. They're a little bit ahead of average in terms of playoff teams, but they're really just playoff team average. So it's not like the Cincinnati Bengals are going to get completely blown out here. Mixon will get his touches.
I think so too. I mean, look, I really don't envision Perine getting a lot of work at all. You and I talked about this. We talked about this a lot throughout the week, not just you and me, but on a lot of shows. Once you get into the postseason, you just begin to see these running backs who are already the lead backs getting more and more work. It's just kind of the way it is, right? Like Perine played 13 of, 62 snaps. Mixon was out there for 48 of them. Wouldn't be surprised if it was even more this time out. When it comes to the wide receivers, though, and we can talk Osama as well, they are in a weird spot. Like I want to refresh our ownership as well, just to see if we've got anything that if we have an update that has changed since I last did one on was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday. Okay, so we got an update an hour ago. Cool. Pulling up wide receivers. Oh, and NBA ownership projections are free today. So are NHL ownership projections. If you want to get in on that, you don't need a subscription or anything. So yeah, this is an interesting one because some of the pricing is so extraordinarily weird, especially on the full slate for DraftKings, where you've got Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs and Mike Evans and AJ Brown all in that 6K range, that Jamar Chase is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 8th highest projected owned receiver. Higgins at 5,700 on DraftKings is the 7th highest projected owned receiver. Tyler Boyd's down there at single digits below 10%. That speaks a lot to what we're looking at here, just in terms of this is not going to be a chalky stack if you decide to go there this week.
Yeah, and you got to just look at it from the most likely game script here involves Tennessee being up slightly, running the ball, which means that Cincinnati is going to be forced into passing the ball, and you know where the ball is going. And yes, CJ Uzomah or Tyler Boyd get there in some of our simulations, but T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are the obvious ceiling plays here. And like you said, they're kind of contrarian. So I'm completely fine going here, especially when you've talked about, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase from week 16 to now, basically over the last month, they each have a game with over 190 yards receiving. So I think there's an outside chance they both get to a 20 fantasy point game. But for the most part, I'm only playing one of the two, and then I'll tack on Uzoma or Boyd. But I agree with you. This stack, when it's contrarian, looks very appealing, especially on that weekend slate.
Cincinnati has a positive leverage score on our top stack tool. You look at the top stack probability, it's third from the bottom, but all things considered, it's not a huge difference from like it's 11% and Tampa Bay is 13%, right? Or the Buffalo Bills are 16%, but they're getting a ton of ownership. It is, they are going to be, I think, and correct me if you think I'm wrong here, Matt, but it feels like in terms of an overall stack, Cincinnati, and I'm not even saying I love them on paper. I'm just talking about from a tournament standpoint, like from ability to get some leverage here on the field on a 4-game slate. It does feel like Cincinnati is the most live stack to do the most live low owned stack to produce this week.
Yeah. I mean, so which underdog stacks look most appealing to me? The Buffalo stack, obviously, in that high total game, that's obvious. But then it's kind of a toss-up. I think Cincinnati and LA are probably really, really close in terms of which underdog passing game do you want to attack here in terms of tournament stacks. If you made the argument for Cincinnati because you got to get to Cooper Kupp, or you have to make some sort of strategic decision to fade Cooper Kupp when you're talking about LA, now they look really appealing simply from a game theory standpoint. I'm not saying they're absolutely going to hit, but I do look at this team having almost 22 implied points, even as an underdog. Joe Burrow, just pretty much week after week, solid projection and also a chance of getting 300 passing yards. We know where the ball is going, and the salary isn't as high. It's just a solid game theory play.
No question. We had a question too. Here's a fun question. I hadn't actually thought about this. Someone said, who has the best DFS season since the beginning of DraftKings for running backs? Then he said, I would think Chris Johnson or CMC. DraftKings was not even close to being around when Chris Johnson had that 2,000-yard season. That was 2009. So is it McCaffrey?
It's probably McCaffrey's season. I think the most important seasons, in my opinion, were probably Bell and David Johnson's 2016, because it was so important to get their PPR value that it actually made sense as the salaries started to aggressively rise to continue to jam them in. But it actually it changed our fundamentals a lot. And that's why we have the arguments about Derrick Henry every year, because he doesn't catch passes. But I think probably CMC is the actual answer.
It is, because he has the second most PPR points in a season ever behind LaDainian Tomlinson. So there's your answer.
Fairly impressive.
Yeah, pretty impressive stuff. It'll be interesting to see where people draft him next year. I think he'll get a little gun shy there. I'll go straight back to the well. I don't know, you can play a full season. Who cares? Anyway, do you have any other thoughts with the rest of Cincinnati? I mean, Usama had a big week, six receptions on 6 targets, got into the end zone. And it's not just like that's an extreme outlier. He's done it a couple of times this year, right? Like he has multiple 20+ fantasy point games during the season. He's not exactly the type of guy that you can rely on to give you that production week in and week out, but he's also not somebody like a Ferkser or a Jeff Swaim where it's 3 for 20 and a touchdown. He can give you that kind of blow up game. And I use the term loosely, but for a cheap tight end, I think it's viable. The only question is when you stack him up against the Kelseys and the Gronks and the Kittles, who's been, we'll get into that, the Dawson Knox, Higbee, it's a little bit more difficult than it would be last week where you're playing these 2 or 3 game or 2 game slates and the tight end position was a whole lot less strong.
Yeah, it's viable but volatile, right? There's a level of volatility to the tight end position, but there's also a level of volatility to the non-elite tight ends that we We just know from even playing season-long fantasy football, we just know that these are low probability plays. I will speak to the size of the overall offense, the available production in Cincinnati. It's been high all year. In terms of the auxiliary weapons here, Tyler Boyd is sitting at 8.6 expected fantasy points per game, which is just a volume roll-up metric on a scale. We all understand fantasy points. And CJ Uzomah is sitting at 9.6 expected fantasy points per game. I'm not saying that that makes Uzomah a higher probability play. I'm really saying that the third and fourth options in the passing game are at a level of you can play them in terms of expected opportunity. That still doesn't decrease their volatility. Uzomah is a low probability play, and in a lot of simulations, he scores like under 5 fantasy points. But to average almost 10 expected fantasy points, that means you get there with 1 touchdown and 60 yards, or even 2 touchdowns sometimes enough. And that's exactly what we've seen this season. Tennessee has not been overly impressive against tight ends over the middle of the field this season.
The amount of people that have not seen Happy Gilmore and think that our boy Terry McBride really took his skate off during a game and tried to stab somebody with it is remarkable. Truly remarkable. And how do you not know that reference? That's an all-time classic reference that should be just ingrained in everybody's knowledge of top Adam Sandler movies. But I digress. Tennessee. Oh, I think I forgot to ask, Matt. Hit that thumbs up if you guys haven't done so yet. If you're on your phone or something and you're in chat, all you got to do is click out of that. Hit it one time. If you forgot, all is forgiven. But yeah, helps us out a ton. We got to feed the algorithm around here. We don't like to play the games, but sometimes we don't make the rules. So subscribe to the channel. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't done so yet. If you're listening to the show after the fact, do that. Leave us a comment. I try and read all of them and respond to all of them. So all of that good stuff helps us go a long way. Plus, I just like to read the comments and see what you guys have to think or have to say. All right. Tennessee. Let's talk about Derrick Henry. Pricing is way different everywhere. He's the highest priced player on the slate on FanDuel and Yahoo, but on DraftKings, he's $7,500. I mean, if Derrick Henry comes in and plays a full workload, $7,500 is the best price you're ever going to get this guy at.
Yeah, you still need something like 22, 23 points to feel like you had a good value at that price, but that's not 30 points. That's a huge difference. So I do feel like I'm going to get to plenty of Derrick Henry. I just think it's going to be one of those things where people are going to see he's back in the lineup. They're going to get excited and they're going to play him. If I'm wrong, the ownership stays pretty low. I'll go with it. I think I'm going to use the field as my guide here. Here's what I expect. I expect him to be active. I expect him to be the focal point of the offense. And if he gets going, we'll just see his normal workload, like what he used to get, where he had, the last 2 games we saw him, he had 28 carries and 29 carries and a total of 2 targets. That is in the range of outcomes here for Derrick Henry. It's not the most probable. I do think you want to have shots on him because there is the chance that he just steamrolls the Bengals just like he has many other defenses before him. The Bengals are the worst team in the playoffs in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. And while they lean towards being a pass funnel this year, this is Derrick Henry we're talking about. And if he's healthy, just like we kind of saw Cam Akers, if they're healthy and explosive, the team is going to lean on them, especially if the game script turns towards the positive.
Yeah, dude, they lean on Derrick Henry if the game script is negative. You know what I mean? I'm not even kidding. Maybe they won't run him 35 times, but if they're down by 2 scores, they're still going to run it on second down pretty frequently. I mean, think about it. They had games earlier this season. A good example would be against, I think it was Seattle, where they were down by multiple scores and just continued to feed Derrick Henry the rock late in the game as he wore the opposing defense down, and they ended up getting the win. This is kind of standard for them. We've seen them do it so often where Derrick Henry is just a battering ram. So yeah, we talk about being game script proof and that being PPR receiver or running back specifically. I'm not saying if you're down by 21 that Derrick Henry is going to be running it on 3rd and 10, but if this is a 10-point game, I have zero concerns about that. Plus, I'm also not convinced that Cincinnati comes up at all. I don't think there's any way. I shouldn't say that. A lot of parity in this league, but I don't think this is a spot where they're playing down by 3 scores or anything. So, yeah, I actually think Derrick Henry, and we'll see what Vrabel says, even though it's probably meaningless. But if he's not going to be limited, I do think his ownership will come up in the coming days. But I'll get to a lot of Derrick Henry at 7,500. He doesn't have the PPR, the pass catching upside, but and receptions, Matt, are worth more than rushing attempts. But we also can't ignore the fact that when you rush the ball 30 times a game, that kind of mitigates all of that, or at least a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It's a good point. You know, they stick to their game plan in Tennessee. And obviously, if Henry is back into full strength, we can use these full season numbers where they were 3rd in the NFL in game script adjusted rush rate. Since week 9, those are the weeks since Derrick Henry left the lineup. They are 8th highest in the NFL in game script adjusted rush rate. Yeah, I think there is a very, I don't know. I almost said a very low likelihood of a blowout here, but we certainly think that if there is a blowout, it's probably Tennessee beating Cincinnati. And if that's the case, then they're going to just run the ball down their throat for the rest of the game here. And Derrick Henry would absolutely pay off, especially at that 7,500 salary.
I got to say, it is shocking that Tennessee was the 1 seed.
It feels weird. I mean, here's the deal. It matters who your division is, right? We see this for a literal decade.
Just ask the Colts, before right?
Tom Brady. Right. Well, I mean, the Colts are a bad team.
They got. Go ahead.
I think we're about to say the exact same thing. So we're just excited here. The Colts are a bad team parading around like they're a decent team because they get to play the Jaguars and Texans twice. And, you know, they got exposed when they played anybody who's remotely good, and then they got beat by Jacksonville to end the season. And so, not to say that Tennessee is a bad team by any stretch. All you can do is beat the teams that are in front of you. But to say they are tested like teams in the AFC North, like the Bengals, or in the NFC West, I think that's just subjectively false.
Yeah. Mikazuki says, haha, shocking. Yeah, pretty shocking, dude. Pretty shocking. Because this is one of those teams that is, as our buddy Ben Rasa says, they're like a random number generator. You don't have any clue what you're going to get from Tennessee each week. They lost to the Jets. They beat the Bills. They've beat some good teams. And then they've
the Bills,
lost
Chiefs, and 49ers. I mean, that's a good pedigree.
Right. They smoked the Chiefs, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. 27-3.
Yeah. Lost to the Steelers. Got crushed by the Patriots, lost to Houston. So I don't think I'm saying anything crazy here. They lost to the Jets. You know what I mean? This is an odd team. It's an odd team. I never know what I'm going to get from Tennessee. And the truth is, even with Derrick Henry on the field, but I think this is a competitive game. I like Derrick Henry. I also am not totally opposed to getting to some Julio Jones if he's going to be really low owned. And let me tell you why. We only have 4 games. So you're going to have to make some decisions that don't exactly feel good. And Julio Jones is coming in around 10%, which is low for an abbreviated slate. He had a bye week, a little bit of time to rest, which is great for a dude who's been dealing with a hamstring injury. He looked better than he has almost all season, dating back to week 2 in week 18. 5 for a targeted 9 times, got into the end zone. I'm not saying Julio is who he always was, but if this rest has helped him and his hamstring is actually healed up, if there's ever like a wide receiver 2 on a team that I would like to take a shot on, it's a guy who just a year ago in the 7 games that he did play was the wide receiver 2. Nobody talks about that Julio Jones was injured a lot last year, but he was the wide receiver 2 and averaged over 100 receiving yards per game in the 7 games that he played to completion. So we'll see. I'll take some stabs at 9 or 10% ownership.
I think that makes some sense in terms of which teams on the weekend that are favored and the passing stack is going under-owned. Tennessee fits the bill there, and then Julio Jones himself is not seeing a whole lot of ownership as well. This is where volume matters, though. One of the reasons he averaged so many receiving yards per game when healthy in Atlanta is because he was being peppered with targets consistently and air yards as well. And, we'll use expected fantasy points again. We were talking about the third and fourth options on the Cincinnati side, averaging around 9 expected fantasy points per game. This is the second option on the Tennessee passing game. Julio Jones is averaging 7.8 expected fantasy points per game. Now, A.J. Brown is averaging 16 expected fantasy points per game, a very typical wide receiver 1 level of expected fantasy points per game. But no one else in this Tennessee offense, including Julio Jones, has seen requisite volume that says, yeah, they're in the definitely you can play them category. So we really are basing this off of the name brand and off of the fact that he's done this before. I'm not thinking you're crazy here. I'm just saying that he needs more volume than we saw. We need Derrick Henry to likely fail here, and he probably needs at least a touchdown, maybe 2, unless suddenly he has one of these A.J. Brown versus San Francisco games, like 16 targets. I just don't really think that's in Julio's range of outcomes here at all.
I don't like him much. I like the ownership, though. And I think
that's fair.
I don't think Julio is going to be popular even a little bit. I mean, not even a little bit, but I understand what you're saying too. I do. But I also think he's only 1 year removed from that, and he's been dealing with a nagging injury all season. So what I'm saying is, in the off, like with Cam Akers, I mean, the guys were telling me yesterday, you talked about embracing risk with Cam Akers on the Monday game. I was on the other side of that. I mean, you were certainly right with the volume. He didn't exactly have a great game in terms of fantasy totals, but you were right for sure in terms of volume. Like, what if Julio Jones is actually 100% heading into this game? What if we haven't seen Julio Jones at 100% since week 2 when he had 28 receiving yards on 6 receptions and had a clear touchdown called back in the end zone? That's what I'm saying. So it's less about the name value and more about what if this guy actually has been hobbled all season long with a hammy and he's back to full strength. If that's the case, I'm willing to sprinkle him in a little bit. That's all.
I think we're actually in agreement there. And I can guarantee you, especially when they put him on IR in midseason, they were like, we don't care at all about the next 4 or 5 games of the season. Just come back for January 20th practice and we'll see you then.
Close out Tennessee for me, Matt.
So you still got players in there like Nick Westbrook-Akine and Anthony Firkser and Jeff Swain. I think the target ceiling for those players is maybe 4. If any of those players saw 5 targets, I would say that was a low probability outcome that occurred here. We didn't really talk about A.J. Brown, but I'm fine playing A.J. Brown. I think he has the ceiling to compare with all the other players, especially the ones that are higher salary than him. That game against San Francisco a few weeks ago is the one you can always point to, saying like someone in this Tennessee passing game actually does have a dozen target, 200 air yard ceiling. Only one player can do that. It's A.J. Brown. It's not my favorite play, but especially on that weekend slate, 6,200 on DraftKings. Now it's looking pretty appealing. Certainly a projection that's better than salary-based expectation.
All right. Had to spend a little bit of additional time on that game just because the Derrick Henry thing it throws a wrench into the works for sure. San Francisco and Green Bay is a good one. It's actually, I am a big advocate of bad weather games in the postseason. I think it's a lot of fun. I mean, it can make things weird for DFS, but usually people just overhype how bad the weather is going to be. They end up fading that spot. I'm not saying that's what everybody does, but usually when people do that, it ends up working against them, right? Because these are still pros. I mean, look at people that were worried about the weather in Buffalo the other day for Josh Allen. Monster game, or the wind for Tom Brady. Despite it dying down closer to kickoff, Brady was still pretty damn good, even though he didn't really need to be. So no real weather here. It should be cold, but if this game were on Sunday, it would have been frigid, but it doesn't really matter. So Jimmy Garoppolo, 6-point dogs heading into Green Bay. And right now the total's at 47 points. Garoppolo fully practiced yesterday, so he should be good to go. Eli Mitchell still got the questionable tag, but he practiced or actually, he might not have the questionable tag anymore. I think it's gone. He practiced fully. Plus, he's playing anyway. He's going to get another 20 plus carries if they're competitive.
Yep.
I actually want to start with George Kittle, though. He was once again used mostly as a blocker, did lead the team in routes ran last week, but that's because he's playing around 100% of snaps every week. Can we have any confidence that things can rebound for him against Green Bay this week?
I don't think we can have confidence, no, because San Francisco will absolutely attempt to play a conservative style in terms of their rush rate. They are number 1 in the NFL in game script adjusted rush rate, and they are bottom 10 in the NFL in game script adjusted pace of play. They are slow, they are deliberate, and they run the ball. That's why you can have a game manager like Jimmy Garoppolo, who, as long as they don't make mistakes and they just remain somewhat accurate, then you're probably going to have an opportunity to win here. And George Kittle is one of the best blockers in the NFL. He is one of the biggest additions to the running game that you can have on an offensive line. And when you got a player like Trent Williams back on the offensive line, you're going to try to run the ball first and foremost. But the ceiling is still there for George Kittle. We saw 2 straight games with over 150 yards receiving, 3 straight games with over 90 yards receiving for George Kittle. So it's absolutely possible here. He's the 3rd tight end in terms of salary on that weekend slate. That's kind of more appealing than the number 1 tight end on the Saturday slate to me. And you're talking about a player with 11 expected fantasy points. So even if they're using him sparingly in the passing game on average, the spike weeks are high enough to keep him in the top 5 among all tight ends here. So I think confidence is a bad word to put because I don't necessarily have it, but I'm going to be playing him in tournaments because of an unprecedented ceiling. Maybe Kelsey's got it. That's about it.
It's just so strange that, you have a big win against Dallas, right? Relatively low scoring game, only 40 total points, but Debo and Kittle combined for 6 targets. It's crazy. The thing I have with Debo is as good as he's been. I mean, this guy is just a dual weapon. You can use him anywhere. You can do whatever you need, and he's going to produce. And it's great that as a rusher out of the backfield, he can be productive. But I hate the fact that he's being used more as a running back than a receiver because, yeah, it's been successful, but I just can't help but wonder how long can you sustain this type of production where it's 10 for 72, and you just keep getting into the end zone and ripping off these big plays on the ground. If there's these games where he has like 8 for 35 and doesn't get into the end zone and is only targeted 4 or 5 times in the passing game, you're paying a premium for Debo on a slate where you have so many underpriced receivers, and he's sandwiched in between Kupp and Adams at the top, and then guys like Evans, Hill, Diggs, all of those guys who are significantly underpriced. So the real question is, how much does ownership affect what you do with Debo Samuel? Because right now, at least in my opinion, Debo Samuel in a vacuum is one of the less appealing players at that price.
Yeah, I'm not completely enthralled by Debo Samuel. Certainly the projection compared to salary-based expectation on the weekend slate does not look good for him. But this is one of those situations where I'm not sure I can fully fade a player who has been this efficient for this much of the season. I mean, just look at the advanced metrics from last week. In comparison to Elijah Mitchell, who wasn't that effective on the ground, Debo Samuel's rushes were the most effective play for San Francisco all game long. He averaged 0.11 EPA per play as a rusher, which is insane, and over 1 expected point added per play as a receiver. I mean, these are success rates that you only see from superstars. So we're defining Debo Samuel as a superstar player that we're fading because the volume projections don't look good. That always puts me in a scare, makes me feel scared because what we're saying is the reason he's gotten there in the past is efficiency, which we have no evidence won't continue here. The Packers defense is definitely playing better right now than Dallas's defense was. That might be one of the indicators here. They're the 3rd best defense left in the playoffs here, the Packers are. But Debo Samuel, it's just, he's too good of a player to fade fully. The projections don't look good for him.
Yeah, I hear you. I guess what I would say is, can you not get that production in the same ceiling from Evans, Hill, Diggs, Chase, Brown? Like the, I just, the rushing upside is cool, but it'd be a lot cooler if he was targeted at least a somewhat consistent clip. If this ends up being one of those games where San Francisco's defense hunkers down, and I think it was Jordan Vanek on Tuesday talking about this same matchup back in 2019 when San Francisco went to the Super Bowl, and they just ran the ball down Green Bay's throat. If we remain in a neutral game script here and Aaron Rodgers is, somewhat neutered in the sense that he's not just ripping off touchdown after touchdown, this could be another game where Elijah Mitchell goes for 25 carries and Deebo Samuel's targeted 3 to 5 times. Not saying that's going to be the case. If the game script flips negative, you can't just run the ball. But I have some worries there. And honestly, I'm okay with being wrong here, but I'll probably go to more of these 6K guys and just hope that I can get the double-digit target game for them and multiple receiving touchdowns.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm smiling because Chris G in chat is like, wow, you guys really are going to go the full 2 hours for 4 games. You didn't think we had it in us, did you? We absolutely do have it in us. We absolutely do. No, that's awesome. And it's one of those things too, where because they're such a run-focused team, and we've seen when Elijah Mitchell is healthy, this team leans so much on him. Then let's go back to expected fantasy points. Let's see, does that volume moving from passing to rushing for a player like Deebo Samuel affect his expected fantasy points, where then he suddenly doesn't look like a player who's going to meet salary-based expectations? And sure enough, his average is down to 13.6 expected fantasy points. That's lower than players like T. Higgins, sort of secondary weapons on more pass-heavy teams. I'm not saying that Deebo Samuel is a bad play, but I am saying that Elijah Mitchell's usage and just the running game usage in general does diminish the ceiling for all these players, particularly Samuel. And someone asked in chat as well, would you play Mitchell and Samuel on the same lineup? I'm actually inclined to say no, especially on lineups that are in the main slate. Is it possible that they hit their ceiling together? Sure, it's absolutely possible, but I think you're talking about taking away rushing touchdowns from one when the other scores here. So I actually would play one or the other, probably not both.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. Especially when you're looking at like, okay, do they cannibalize each other's production? Yeah, they have been. And are there other receivers that are just in phenomenal spots that you can actually pay less for? Yeah, there are. So that's where I'm at. We got
Jair Alexander back in the lineup. Like, there's some things working against this team's receiving core.
I agree. And I'll say this much to close out San Francisco. And as far as going to 2 hours, now we got to be out by 12:15 Eastern. We'll be fine. That first game we had to spend just a lot of time on with the Tennessee situation. But with Juwan, I think Juwan Jennings is viable. He had 5 of the 25 he had 5 targets on 25 passing attempts from Garoppolo last week. And I honestly don't think Ayuk is a crazy option either. These are 2 spots where these guys are not high probability plays, but on a 4-game slate, if Jimmy has to throw, you're getting them at a discount. I certainly don't love Ayuk, but Jennings has been someone that's targeted in the end zone. I like that. Recently, he has, touchdowns in 3 of his last 7 games, 4 touchdowns over that span. Not bad for a guy that is almost a bare minimum. So I don't have an issue there. He's not a high probability play, but if you need someone cheap, maybe you're doing like a Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams lineup, and you're trying to squeeze Derrick Henry in there. I don't know if it's possible. I haven't made lineups yet. Juwan Jennings could be one of those guys that works. And it makes for a skinny stack situation with him and Devontae Adams. Go ahead.
Nope, exactly that. And we've actually seen, this is where the usage in the passing game, you'll see in expected fantasy points, especially if it gets near the red zone. Juwan Jennings, quietly 9 expected fantasy points for a significantly less salary. You're just getting 4 expected fantasy points less than Deebo Samuel and just 2 less than Brandon Ayuk.
I am really fascinated by what's going to happen in the backfield for Green Bay. I do think that Aaron Jones' workload will come up somewhat substantially, given that he, sat last week, sat the week before that. Lots of rest for Jones, who's been dealing with that nagging knee injury. And one thing that is really, really, I think something that illustrates where he's at, Matt, is that for the first time in a while, he fully practiced on a Tuesday. So I do believe that AJ Dillon is going to get his fair share of opportunities as well. Would not be shocked, though, if we see an Aaron Jones role that equates to somewhere around 20 total looks. And that, at least to me, makes him interesting from a tournament standpoint, because I think he'll be one of the most overlooked running backs at an awkward price point this week and a kind of undefined role going into the postseason. Where are you at on the backfield?
Yeah, so that play kind of makes sense to me. Certainly the projection compared to his salary does not make sense. It just doesn't make sense in our projection. So you're kind of going out on a limb there. Actually, our projections like AJ Dillon compared to his salary-based expectations. But I think the narrative that we're kind of sticking with, and this is one that I tend to believe as well, is that teams go with their most explosive player. Like, they've already decided the hot hand from the hot hand approach that they want. And that, unless something catastrophic happens, they lean on those top players. So AJ Dillon has definitely earned his playing time in this playoff game here. Don't get me wrong, but I think it is possible that with Aaron Jones, like you said, healthier than he's been really all season, that they do lean on him, especially if the San Francisco defense sells out to stop a player like Davante Adams. I'm not going to tell you not to play him, but I am saying that the ownership is a little high for me. The projection is a little low for me to have him be a priority play. I won't stop you from playing home favorite running backs, especially ones where you can make a case for them getting more touches.
Yeah, and we're a data-driven site at Awesemo, right? So, when I start talking about the intangibles and stuff that you can't quantify it's definitely not what's normally going on here. But I do think that once you get to the postseason, odd things happen and teams will lean on somebody that, has been very, very good and very efficient all season long. So with Jones, I don't know, man, he's just good. Like, he's a good running back. He's a good pass catching back. He has all of the tools to become, or to be somebody that, like, if Jones ended up seeing 15 or 14 carries and 6 targets in this game, I wouldn't be shocked. But I think he's objectively not one of the best plays on this slate. You just have to look at how many of these other players are underpriced. I just also don't know if when Saturday rolls around that he's going to be, 18%. I think he could be even lower than that. I'd be shocked if he was higher owned than Elijah Mitchell, to be honest. Maybe I'm wrong, but that would be surprising to me.
He also, they played this team. He had 21 total opportunities on a 75% snap share in week 3 against San Francisco, 96 total yards and a touchdown. So certainly not crazy. I know you won't be alone, though. I think he's going to be a little bit overly popular.
Jones, you think?
Yeah. Okay. I haven't seen. Let's check that ownership.
17% right now.
That's not crazy to me. All right. That actually makes. I'm a little more bullish hearing that. I thought it was going to be over 20.
I would just be surprised if he's only like 8% less than Derrick Henry and 5% less than Joe Mixon. I don't know. We'll see. I think it'll change coming up. We'll see. What are you doing with the passing game? You got Davante Adams. You got Allen Lazard, who's been a touchdown machine of late. Josiah DeGuara. We'll see what's going on with MVS. And then I think we're getting Randall Cobb back as well. Or possibly, right?
Yeah, I think that they gave him the, quote, green light or something like that. So I expect him to play here in this game. But this is all about Davante Adams, right? This is all about what you do with Davante Adams instead of players like Cooper Kupp or Tyreek Hill. The 8,500 salary on DraftKings is certainly not too much. He's going to need about a 23 to 26 point score to have that score where if you didn't play him, he really hurt you. How does he get there? a very typical Davante Adams game, like 12 targets, a touchdown, 100+ yards. That's absolutely in the range of outcomes here. San Francisco is a average defense in terms of playoff teams in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. I certainly think they try to sell out and stop Davante Adams, forcing Green Bay to win with Jones and Dillon. I don't know if that's necessarily successful here. I don't think they have a single cornerback that can hang with Adams one-on-one.
Do you like any of the secondary options for Green Bay?
I kind of don't, actually. I'm not, if I'm going to be playing a Green Bay passing attack player, like maybe as a one-off, you can play players like Marquez Valdes-Scantling or Alan Lazard, who, when they did play, Lazard actually has 12 expected fantasy points over his last 6 weeks in the games that he started. The others are just, I get it, DeGuara can score. They're low probability plays with a target ceiling of maybe 5 or 6. So large field only, and probably not as a one-off.
All right. Hey, if you haven't checked out Prize Picks yet, no better time to do it. Jordan, you want to throw that in the chat if you haven't done so yet. If you sign up at Prize Picks, not only do you get a $100 first match deposit bonus when you use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, but also 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum, $90 value, every single tool on our site, not just for football either. So like when football's over or when football's not happening during the week, you've got basketball, you've got PGA, you have MMA, every sport. I don't know when NASCAR comes back, but NASCAR, you name it, every single sport out there. And Prize Picks, which is a daily prop-based contest site, has literal props for literally almost everything out there. Sports that you may never have even heard of. In all seriousness, though, check it out. The menu of props is awesome over there. You don't have to worry about juice or anything like that. You're just taking the over or under on any of these props, putting it into a lineup, whether it's a 2, 3, 4, or 5 player lineup. If you hit 5 of 5, you can 10x your entry. But unlike traditional books, and this is the important part, okay? Unlike traditional books, if you hit 4 of 5, well, you still 2x your money. You hit 3 of 5, you still make money back. So you're not just throwing out wild parlays and trying to hit 5 legs every day and hoping that it hits, and when it doesn't, you lose everything. No, it's a really awesome site, prizepicks.com, app store. You can download it. You can go to Google Play Store as well, however you want to do it. And we have the free player props tool at Awesemo to help you out. We have oddshopper.com, which is amazing and entirely free, gives you the expected win rate and our projections on every single prop, you name it. So do it. Check out the link in the description or the one in chat. Get your free month when you sign up, and you'll hear from us in 24 to 48 hours. We'll get you set up, and we'll get you in our premium Discord as well in the office hours, where you got our pros helping you better your game, taking your questions. I don't know why not, why you wouldn't want to check it out. And you can do cross-sport entries. That's important. Cross-sport entries. If you wanted to do basketball, football, and another sport that you're familiar with, you can throw them all into one lineup and make some money. Prizepicks.com. Check it out. Use the promo code Awesemo and get your free month when you use that link in the description. All right, Matt, let's talk about a Rams and Tampa Bay game as we move to the Sunday slate. The Rams coming off just an absolute bludgeoning of the Arizona Cardinals. Kyler Murray, man, woof, not great. They're 3-point dogs on the road, though. Tampa Bay, you can never count them out. 48.5-point total. Tom Brady continues to do what he does. But let's start with Cooper Kupp, who, I looked it up when someone asked about the best season for a wide receiver for PPR since DraftKings came around. I'm pretty sure it's this year from Cooper Kupp, even if you took out the 17th game.
It's outrageous. It's just outrageous. I really don't remember seeing anything like this in terms of the hit probability of a wide receiver being this high. And I mean, we just came off a Davante Adams season where he was used absurdly high in the red zone. So while the yardage and receptions weren't there like it was for Cooper Kupp this season, I mean, this is just on a totally different level. He was quiet really in the first half of that game, then he completely explodes, scores a touchdown. I've said this multiple times in both videos on demand on the YouTube channel and on this matchup show. Cooper Kupp is in that fade him at your own risk category. I don't know what to say other than there's a chance that he has a type of score that no one else on the slate, including the quarterbacks, hits. And if you miss him, you're completely out in terms of getting money that weekend in DFS. Is that the highest probability option? No. But there's only one player who has that in his range of outcomes at the skill positions, and it's Cooper Kupp.
I wanted to real quickly, Matt, because I forgot to ask you this question. Did you have any interest in stacking Green Bay and San Francisco? That's a really integral part of this entire slate, is talking about which stacks make the most sense. And I don't want to overlook that. San Francisco has the lowest by far top. Jordan, you don't have to go back in the sidebar. I'm just going to do this quickly. By far the lowest top stack probability on the slate. And then Green Bay's around 12%. So it really in the middle of the pack. Where are you at on stacking either of these teams?
I'm not necessarily stacking Green Bay. Excuse me. Not necessarily stacking San Francisco, but if I do, I'm going to do it in a contrarian way, like Garoppolo and Kittle, a player who his projections are fine, but just the public is going to be nervous because they haven't seeded it in a while. Green Bay, if I'm stacking them, I'm doing my darndest to get to Devontae Adams. I will have almost no Green Bay stacks without Devontae Adams.
All right. Joshua Boras says the shortest rest of any team traveling across the country to face a team that stops the run better than any other. Why is Cam Akers popular? Is it just a West Coast bias? Look, I'm not particularly worried about one less day of rest. It is what it is. I totally agree with you, though, that the Cam Akers ownership right now seems exorbitant. I don't really get why he's even this high, and he's only at like 17%. But I don't see why he would be the same projected ownership as Eli Mitchell. I truly do not understand that even a little bit, Matt. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you can knock some sense into me. But while Cam Akers was used heavily last game, you know, you love to see it if you're a Cam Akers fan coming back after 5.5 months from a ruptured Achilles. That's great stuff. But Sony Michel did still play 40% of snaps. That's the first. I'm gonna give you all the reasons why I don't like Akers, and then I have you break down the rest of this team, and also tell me if you think I'm right or wrong. Okay, how's that sound?
Okay.
Good?
So wait, you're right or wrong about the Akers ownership not making sense, and then I'll break it down for you.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you why I don't think Akers should be a popular play at all, and you tell me if you think I'm right or wrong. The Rams have, along with Tampa Bay, the lowest game script adjusted pass play percentage or run play percentage in the league, meaning these teams both in neutral game scripts love to throw the football. Last week, bit of an exception, right? They went up early. They had that pick six on a terrible Kyler Murray, live grenade toss out of the end zone. The game, he looked like he was throwing a live grenade, trying to save his life.
Absolutely right.
There was at no point was that game competitive. Sony Michel still had 13 carries in that game. Okay. So they made up for 30 carries. Michel still played 40% of snaps, 53% for Akers. And say what you want, but McVay is somebody that will run a hot hand approach. Tampa Bay is a true pass funnel defense. Tom Brady can rack points up. So I do not see this game going nearly like it did against Arizona, which was in LA, and Arizona couldn't move the football. They had -1 yards at almost halftime. Okay. So all of that to me screams that this could be a bad spot. With Eli Mitchell, yes, you do have Deebo Samuel getting some carries, but Eli Mitchell is, if this game stays competitive, as much of a lock to get 20 plus carries as anyone. And I'm not convinced that Cam Akers is going to be this elite pass catching back anyway. So I've said enough. There are a lot of reasons for me that Cam Akers, despite a somewhat solid performance in the wild card round, just doesn't make a ton of sense to me this week.
All right. I'll give you a little movie quote. Here we go. I'll try to do my best Southern drawl too. That is a lucid, intelligent, well thought out objection.
What is that?
Overruled.
Wait, hold on. Wait. My cousin Vinny?
Yes, sir. My man, you got it. That is right.
That was such a good accent that was such a good, that was so good that it was actually the accent of you doing the judge that got it for me at the end. Solid stuff. That was a good accent.
Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it.
I mean, that was straight like Southern. Done. That sounded just like him.
Hey, I
Jordan?
grew up in not that far south, but in VA, we got some southern accents that helped me learn as a kid. I think it's possible that can makers can hit here. I completely get what we're talking about in chat here. Traveling west, not a good game script, but I do object to them saying that this is a team in Tampa Bay that stops the run better than any other team. Maybe if you're looking at a 2-year sample, that might be true. But I will say in the shorter term sample, they've actually had some problems against the run that their terrible pass defense has actually masked. Let me give you this. Over the last 3 weeks of the regular season, Tampa Bay ranked 27th in yards allowed per rush attempt. That brought their season-long average to 21st in the NFL. That is a place we that we don't see them. We see them in the top 5 in that stat. In schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, it's a little bit better, but we're talking 12th in the NFL. Not first, not fourth, not 6th, 12th. So I think that Cam Akers is certainly not as good of a play as he was last week, even though we actually have it on film now that he can still play, that he looks okay. As you said, Sony Michel is still very much involved, but Tampa Bay quietly is one of the worst defenses left in the playoffs here. I'm not saying they're going to lose this game. I'm not saying the defense is so much of a liability that they will lose, but I am saying that the probability of all Rams players is higher than you might think. And honestly, if I'm just looking at this slate, this 4-game slate overall, I want to lean on this Buffalo Kansas City game that we're going to get to in a minute. And then this one as much as possible. And then just get to the one-off players that I trust in the most from the first 2 games we talked about. It's really a game environment that I want to get a lot of players, including the running backs from the Rams.
Okay. Yeah, I'm nowhere near the Rams running backs this week. We definitely see this one a little bit differently. And that's what's fun about this show. Akers still averaged 3.2 yards per attempt in that game. Like he wasn't good outside of, and I know people are saying like he got plays called back. Okay, fine. But he's still overall, he had that 40-yard reception. So I won't say he was bad, right? I won't say he was bad, but the biggest thing for me is there are so many, like Devin Singletary's 5,900. Leonard Fournette, if he plays, is 5,700. Mitchell's 5,800. I just find there to be way better running backs, but we'll see, Matt. The great thing about this is one of us will be right and one of us will be wrong.
We'll know for sure.
Yes, we will. Wrap up the Rams for me, and then we'll talk Tampa, and then we'll close it out with Buffalo and Kansas City. And for those of you that are sticking around and stuck around last week, do the same. The FanUp NFL contest stream is coming up right after this. You've got Greg Ehrenberg, Terry McBride right after this. That would stay on the stream. You don't have to go anywhere. It's right here. And they're going to take you up to around 12:45, 1 o'clock, something like that. I'm sorry. 12:45, 1 o'clock sounds about right. Huge contests at FanUp too. I think they filled the 400K last week, which is pretty wild. So if you haven't done so yet or checked it out, hang with those guys after the show. You'll have a good time. All right. Close out Tampa for me. Just kind of the Higbees, the Jeffersons, the Odells, and then let's talk Tampa Bay.
Yeah, it matters how much Odell Beckham is scoring for this Rams team, because honestly, that is the absolute best way to boost a player like Beckham's confidence. The fact that he scored 6 times since being traded, even if his yardage is kind of all over the place sometimes, it feels completely worthwhile for probably for him and for us as fantasy players here. And if they're going to consistently get Odell Beckham that involved in the red zone, that's going to mean Cooper Kupp is even more open once again. Just having 2 elite weapons in that space when the field gets smaller is so valuable. So Beckham is by far my favorite option. He is not going to be unpopular because he keeps on scoring. Van Jefferson definitely has a projection better than salary-based expectations, and so does Tyler Higbee. As I said, I'm going to be game stacking this game. My secondary stacking options are more appealing here. I love Beckham at a salary both on the 1-game and the 2-game slate here. And while I'm not going to play both Jefferson and Higbee in a lineup, I'm happy to tack on either one of them to a Kupp or even a Beckham stack with Stafford.
So you already pretty much know where I'm at on this game, and I'm going over passing yards for both of these guys. Odd shopper, we've got Tom Brady projected. We haven't projected for 302.5 yards. I like that. I'd be surprised if Brady does not eclipse 300 yards in this game. I anticipate a lot of passing attempts. Again, both teams, the two lowest game script, unless it's changed, Matt. Last time I looked, if they aren't the two lowest, they're both bottom 5 in run play percentage. Is it both for 1 and 2, right? Or
1 and
31st and 32nd? Yeah. So they throw the football a lot. Tom Brady, almost, I should say, all of the games where he has failed to throw for, 285 or 286 yards, props at 285.5, have been where they've just taken a commanding lead, or strange games like against the Saints where they put up 0 points and the entire team got hurt. So I like that. I like Stafford over passing yards as well. And at Odd Shopper, they give you the best bet. You don't even have to look for it. Like, you can click on where it shows the best bet and it'll give you all of the books available to you where that prop is. Like for me, DraftKings, BetMGM, Caesars, Sugar House, FanDuel. The best one here is PointsBet, 285. But I told you the other day, this was like 282 on DraftKings. I told you it was going to come up. It's 291.5 now. So it's just going to keep climbing on Brady. I think you get a lot of passing yards. He threw for 432 against the Rams earlier this season. We have 59% expected win rate. It's okay. 11% expected ROI, but this is just one I really like. And I love that we haven't projected over 300 yards, which is where I would put him as well. So, all right. Talk to me about Tampa Bay. I'll say quickly, I love Mike Evans, I love Gronk, and I love Leonard Fournette, and I love Brady. I think the Rams have real problems in the secondary right now, and there's nobody better than Tom Brady in exploiting it. And last thing, yes, he got sacked a couple times against the Eagles, but this is still, and this offensive line I know has had some problems, but Brady generally is phenomenal at getting the ball out early if he needs to. For the most part, he's been one of the best protected quarterbacks that we've seen. The Rams, one way to mitigate their struggles in the secondary right now is their pass rush. If they can't get there with the pass rush, Tom Brady is going to carve them up.
That is the big concern, right? Because that's what it looked like. It looked like that Kyler Murray literally didn't have time to think in that game against the Rams. And it wasn't necessarily that the coverage was superior. Jalen Ramsey's out there. And by the way, I was the one saying that if you want to avoid Jalen Ramsey, play Zach Ertz. And you know what? Jalen Ramsey spent some time covering Zach Ertz one-on-one. So shows what I know about defensive schemes here, especially when you get into the playoffs. Aaron Donald is scheme independent in terms of you either stop him or you don't. And that offensive line in Tampa Bay got beat up against the Philadelphia Eagles, and that may turn into a bigger storyline here if that Los Angeles Rams defensive line is able to get through, because there's no mobility to speak of whatsoever for Tom Brady. That's how this thing falls apart for Tampa Bay, right? Los Angeles gets there. Tampa can't stop Tom from getting sacked, and he just simply can't get the ball out. We don't see that very often because Brady is one of the best in the league in getting it out quickly. But it is worth noting that all of these weapons for the Tampa Bay offense have projections ahead of salary-based expectations, except for Mike Evans. So on a team like Tampa is right now, where they have one primary outside weapon, it does kind of look like you just stick Jalen Ramsey on Mike Evans and figure it out from there. We definitely have Rob Gronkowski ahead of salary-based expectations and ahead of Evans relatively here. Not going to tell you not to play Mike Evans on a team that's favored here at home. I just don't know if I love it. I said I love this game environment. I think the shootout potential is through the roof here. So in that regard, play Mike Evans. But if you're comparing Evans and Gronk for me, Gronk is my choice.
I just want to throw this out there. We have to pay very close attention to Tristan Wirfs and Ryan Jensen. If these guys don't play, that is really bad news for Tampa and is really good news for that defensive line for the Rams. It's really huge. I mean, that could cripple them. It could cripple them. And Matt, I honestly will change my opinion if both of those guys are out. But I also think Brady is so good that if he'll find ways to get the ball out early, and then we'll have to adjust from there. So hang with us on Saturday and Sunday. Hopefully we'll have more news on that. All right, let's talk about Buffalo. Oh, and if Leonard Fournette is active, there's no reason not to like a guy that's averaging like 7 targets per game over the last couple of months. It's just simple. Jordan, skip Hall of Fame. We're going too long here. Thanks, man. And yeah, like I said, the FanUp show coming up next. Buffalo, Kansas City. Matt, I'm going right back to Devin Singletary, and I have no shame whatsoever. He is the guy and probably would have played 90% of snaps if that game wasn't a blowout last week. Give me Devin Singletary. Give me Stephon Diggs at an absurdly low price point. I know Kansas City's defense is playing better, but this total is the highest on the slate by almost 6 points. There's a lot to like here on the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, there is. And the highest total game is the start of it. The level of offensive ceiling and firepower from the skilled positions is another part of it. The fact that these teams know each other well and have some tricks that they're probably going to be pulling out of their playbook is another part of it. I love this game for DFS purposes, for betting purposes, and just from a fan standpoint. I want to see these two games. As my friend said at the gym the other day, I wish this were the championship game in the AFC. I don't really care. I'm just thrilled I get to see it in the playoffs. These two teams have a huge amount of respect for each other, but they want to beat the crap out of each other. That's the kind of game I want to see. On the Buffalo side, I think Devin Singletary is a great play. Expected fantasy points puts him number 2 among running backs on the Saturday slate and number 3 on the 2-game slate here on DraftKings here with over 17 expected DraftKings fantasy points. They're finally turning him into the bell cow running back that we've always wanted him to be here, at least on this show. And the Kansas City Chiefs, while they did pull it together at the end of the season, they're still well below average in yards allowed per rush attempt. So I think that could be an area they exploit, especially if that Kansas City defense is doing everything in their power to slow down the big playability of players like Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen here, which is what I would do if I were a defensive coordinator trying to scheme and stop the Buffalo Bills. So obviously Singletary looks good there. I'll play some Diggs. I don't think they're going to stop him overall. And I'm actually surprised here. We have Davis, Beasley, and Emmanuel Sanders all below or at salary-based expectations. Because of the game environment, I'm still getting into plenty of them in my latest run of lineup building here. That may change as we get closer to Sunday. I just can't get away from this high total.
I can't either. And I'll tell you, man, Beasley was 30% of snaps, 8 routes ran last week, very, very low. Gabe Davis is probably the guy that if you're taking shots here, I mean, I can't say I love him, but if you're taking shots and you're hoping for a touchdown, he's there. But the Diggs price is just absurdly low. And then Dawson Knox was phenomenal last game. With him, though, and I've said this to you guys before, like Dawson Knox needs the touchdowns to get there, and you just so happen to get 2 of them, so that's good. I'm not in love with Dawson Knox this week, honestly, at all.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at salary on the 4-game slate, 4,900. We have him 5th among tight ends in projection. He probably needs like a 14, 15 point game in order to really hurt you in tournaments at that price. That's possible, but again, you're looking at a 2-score game. 2 straight 2-score games, not impossible. Probably not happening.
Kansas City, man, Chiefs backfield. What are we doing with the Chiefs backfield, given that Clyde Edwards-Helaire looks like he's going to be good to go? He practiced fully yesterday. Darrell Williams is healthy. Jerick McKinnon got worked in last week and was damn effective. This is one of those backfields that I just have very little confidence that I know what's going on. I can admittedly say, Matt, like I have no idea what's going to happen with this backfield if all of them are active.
Yep. I don't want to pretend like I really know either. And we know the Kansas City Chiefs prefer to be a pass happy team. They are 3rd in the NFL in game script adjusted pass rate. And so none of them are must play options, but all of them have over 9 expected fantasy points in the games that they have played in over their last 6 weeks. So that's not including games that they were absent here. That's enough to play them in tournaments. So when there is uncertainty, maybe I'll lean into that uncertainty in large fields and take some shots here. But I'm not going to pretend like I know what the Chiefs are going to do in this 1-game slate. And I do want to point out one other thing as well. Someone else asked, I think it was Steven earlier, asked if there was game script adjusted fantasy points allowed. One reason we don't want to do that is because there's no actual difference between there's no actual difference between the point score later in the game or when the game is a blowout than in the beginning of the game. The reason we want to do that for things like rush rate and play rate is because that affects volume, which directly affects fantasy production. So that's why we would game script adjust the rates of passing and the rates of plays before we game script adjust fantasy points. We only want to schedule adjust that over the course of a multi-game sample size. So I hope that clears that up for you. Back to this game. My favorite, if you had to ask me, is actually Clyde Edwards-Helaire if he comes back. If he doesn't, Jerick McKinnon is my choice, but I don't feel good about that.
Swaggy, what's up, Swaggy Pieces? Even if Clyde Edwards-Helaire plays, I'm still playing Jerick McKinnon. He fits what they like to do more than the other two running backs. Yeah, I can't do it. I can't do it, especially if he pulls any ownership. Like McKinnon was a complete afterthought when Edwards-Helaire was healthy. Darrell Williams, outside of last game, has been good. There's too many variables here. Plus, Darrell Williams had that fumble early in the game. I'm not convinced that he was 100%. He was a limited participant in practice all week. I just don't think he was healthy in that game. It was a complete rout over Pittsburgh. So, this is one where I would just rather not play any of them and get to many of the other underpriced running backs on this slate. I'm fine getting away from Kansas City running backs, perfectly fine with it, especially considering that this could be another Mahomes game where every touchdown is through the air. So I really don't feel like taking the risk. Tyreek Hill's price is stupid low. And I know that he was dealing with that heel injury, but judging from his celebration on a called back touchdown where he had like a backflip where he's 10 feet in the air, I think his heel is okay. I think he's good. Travis Kelce is always viable. I like Gronk a little bit more, but that's just a price point thing. For me, Tyreek Hill has the ceiling. He has such a huge ceiling. There's no Tre'Davious White. Yes, the Bills secondary is still good. They will find ways to make life difficult for him, but Tyreek is so cheap that when you have a guy of that ceiling and that price point, I'm going to have a very tough time not trying to get a decent amount of him.
This is the biggest puzzle piece of the slate right here. The 2-game slate, I should say, is Tyreek Hill's salary point. It's fascinating because it's just objectively too low. There's a way that it doesn't go well for Hill. Obviously, he's a wide receiver. The volatility of the position naturally built in here, but you said it. The ceiling is absurd. The Bills do not have that shutdown corner that would make them the odds-on favorite by far, at least certainly in my book, to be the Super Bowl champion here. And it just takes a couple of big plays like we almost saw last week for Mahomes and Hill to hit. He is my favorite play in the Chiefs receiving core. That's not surprising here. Kelce is far, far from a bad play, but comparing to salary-based expectations, Gronk looks like the slightly better value. As usual, they make it impossible to play Mahomes, Hill, and Kelce together, so you'll have to decide. That's why we always say which one we prefer. And then but beyond that, I do think they are going to design plays for Mecole Hardman, but we saw Byron Pringle get there last time. You can go back to the well there. He's the 17th highest salary wide receiver. He's got a projection ahead of salary-based expectations. Again, you're talking about players who usually don't hit 2 games in a row, but in this high total game, especially if you're stacking other stars with Mahomes, go ahead and add them on as well.
Well, we got a lot of NFL content coming up throughout the week leading up to Saturday, right? We'll have multiple hours of content on Saturday leading up to Live Before Live. Sunday, we'll have a ton of content as well. I think we're probably going to do the 4-hour stream again. I don't know what we're doing. Whatever it is, it's going to be a lot. Strategy show tomorrow, all that good stuff. And of course, the FanUp contest show coming up right now with Greg Ehrenberg and with Terry McBride. Seriously, stick right here. Don't go anywhere and get us one more like, because we're at 99 and 100 just looks a whole lot better. Appreciate you guys hanging out. Remember, free content, NBA ownership projections, NHL ownership projections, both free today. And if you're looking to dip your feet in the waters over here at Awesemo, it is warm. Use the promo code NFL Strategy Show, all one word, all caps, get you 25% off everything on the site, every single sport, every tool created by Awesemo himself, who has won, well, Millions of dollars using those tools. NFL Strategy Show, all caps, all one word. Come check us out and join the family over there at Awesemo. Until next time, we'll catch you back here on the Strategy Show. Follow Matt at Draftaholic, me at Loughy_D. And stick around. FanUp show coming up next. Peace.
See ya.
going on, everybody? It is the Awesemo FanUp strategy show. We got a new partnership with FanUp. If you guys aren't familiar with the app, pretty cool, different way to play daily fantasy sports over there. They have contests that run throughout the playoffs. It's kind of like a combination of best ball, yearly fantasy, and daily fantasy. A lot of stuff going on. Also, if you're signing up for the first time on the app, use the promo code Awesemo. They'll give you $20 for free. Don't have to do anything other than download the app, sign up using the promo code Awesemo. Don't have to put any money down, but you get $20 for free when you sign up using that promo code Awesemo. And then also you can enter some of the contests that we have running up there. There's the contest that started last week that has the $200,000 to first place, $400,000 total prize pool. And that's something that runs throughout the playoffs. We'll talk about some of the strategy for that as well. But other than that, Terry and I are going to go position by position, just talking about some of the top overall plays on FanUp for this weekend. Keep in mind, no salary cap. You can play whoever you want. There's the flex position where you get 1.5x the fantasy points. That's going to be important. Cooper Kupp, somebody we're probably going to be considering there. But other than that, Terry, how you doing this week? And ready to go position by position here?
Bud, should be good to go through the slate with you and to talk about the different options that we could put in the different selections. Psyched to get into a new site. This will be my first time really delving into FanUp here, but it looks like a cool app, so I'm interested to talk about it. And it's been a strange week, but a good one. And hope same for you. Did you play any basketball on that ridiculous basketball slate last night? I assume you did since you were on the show.
Yeah, it did. Actually, it went pretty well for me yesterday, and especially from a prop perspective. I know we had an odd shopper. We had a bunch of Kata Bates job props that looked really good, and he barely ended up playing. So those pretty much all hit. So that was the biggest portion of my profit. But also, yesterday's slate was pretty solid, and typically I don't love 13-game NBA slates, but eventually get a normal size NBA slate. But for now, we've got some football games to talk about. There's also basketball contests that are up over on FanUp for right now, focusing on the football one. But let's start with the quarterbacks here, Terry. And obviously, at this point in the playoffs, we're basically only looking at elite quarterbacks, with Ryan Tannehill and Jimmy Garoppolo being the two outliers here, with no salary cap restrictions and us being able to play whoever we want. Quarterback, we're just looking at some of the top guys. So I'm going to ask you, you could choose from anybody this weekend. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Joe Burrow, some of the top producing fantasy quarterbacks this year. Who's your favorite this weekend, though?
I mean, it's really interesting when you can have anyone that you want. We have to play a little bit of that game of, trying to guess where the public's going to be. We can use our ownership projections from some of the other sites to kind of inform that. And, we want to play the tap dance of getting a little bit away from the field, maybe, while still staying with one of the most highly projected guys, one of the most likely guys. When we're looking at a board where Josh Allen is on top I'm using our DraftKings projections, by the way. It's very similar scoring, just a little bit of a difference with the passing yard totals. I think it's point per 25 yards versus point for 20, but same overall difference. So by DraftKings projections, we've got Josh Allen on top, and then we've got a 5-point separation from him to Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow. We could throw into that same bucket. Any one of those guys I'm really happy to go with, but what I'm trying to judge it by is both our ownership projections and our boom score probabilities from that DraftKings slate. And looking at those numbers, kind of the sweet spot to me is around Tom Brady, where we've got a 7% boom score probability compared to if you go down to like Matthew Stafford. And the boom score does factor in the pricing from those sites, so it's not perfect for this. But if you go down to like a Matthew Stafford, he's at like half that. If you go up to Josh Allen, he's only a point or two ahead of that. And Tom Brady projected for around 13% ownership on those sites, even though his salary is a lot lower than some of those other guys. So that leads me to believe that Brady's not going to be the most popular pick, and he's right there with the top projected guys. So I'm kind of inclined to go that route, but I don't really think you're going wrong if you pick any one of these guys. I think they're going to be owned somewhat similarly up at the top. There's not that much spread between whether I'm taking Josh Allen or whether I'm taking Aaron Rodgers here. So I'm happy to go with any of them, but just kind of based on the way I was thinking about the slate and how this might come together with where we've got some stronger data points, it kind of led me to thinking about Tom Brady there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense if we're going to go contrarian. Certainly the chalk, I think it's going to be pretty split in between Allen and Mahomes in terms of who is going to be the chalk this weekend on FanUp. They're both projected fairly similarly no matter where you look. Something else that does benefit Tom Brady a little bit is, like you said, with it being a point for every 20 passing yards as opposed to 25, just think if there's a big passing game, it does lend itself to be a little bit more favorable for passing quarterbacks as opposed to rushing quarterbacks, which is something that kind of bridges the gap versus what we see on DraftKings scoring, where it's pretty heavily weighted towards running quarterbacks. This makes the two of them a little bit tighter between passing and rushing QBs. So Tom Brady, I do like as a contrarian play. And I think a lot of it matters too. If you're playing the $200,000 to first place contest, $400,000 prize pool that started last week, I think that depending where you are in the standings, that should influence who you're looking at some of these plays. Because if you're ahead in the standings right now, you can go ahead and play the chalk and just try to keep pace because you're already towards the top of the standings. If you've fallen behind the standings because something went wrong last week for whatever reason, then you start to look a little bit more contrarian. That's where Tom Brady comes into the mix. On this site, though, I don't think we have to consider Ryan Tannehill or Jimmy Garoppolo at all. Joe Burrow, Aaron Rodgers, to me, also still strong options, but we have them projected quite a bit far behind the top QBs. So I'll ask you, if you're looking to play the chalk, do you have a preference between Allen or Mahomes?
That is a real toss-up for me. I would probably lean into... Jeez. I would probably lean into the Mahomes side of it. Okay. Just based on the weapons overall. I like his weapons a little bit more in terms of the skill players that he's throwing the ball to in particular. So I would probably go that route, but it's really close. I mean, we are really picking nits there. If you look at last week's scoring, 41.9 versus 41.06, both very similar boom scores, similar projections for this week. I'm very happy taking either one of those guys. If I gun to my head, I'll take Pat Mahomes.
All right, so let's move on over to the running backs then. And I think here's something that's going to be pretty interesting. Is Derrick Henry's coming back. Presumably, I'm assuming that he's going to get a full workload. They've been pretty cautious bringing him back. We haven't seen anything in terms of a definitive report on what his workload is going to be. Here's the most recent report that we have right here is that when asked if he'll be activated for Saturday's divisional game against the Bengals, he smiled. He said, let's see how this week goes. And as of now, the expectation is he's going to start. Any real concerns with you when it comes to Derrick Henry and his workload? Because if he's full go, he's pretty clearly the top running back this weekend.
Yeah, and there's also the consideration that like a reduced workload for Derrick Henry is a normal workload for a lot of these other running backs, right? Sure. It's like this is a guy that when he was healthy was getting 27.38 attempts per game. If you look at a guy like, let's just take Jonathan Taylor off the top of the list from running backs for the season, 19.53 attempts per game. So there's just a major difference between his usual volume and how much they feed him the ball when he's healthy. I expect if he's out there, he's full go, and we're not going to need to worry about that. But even if they do reduce it by a little bit, I think he's still probably going to be one of the lead volume rushers, and we know he's got the ability. The guy was leading the league in running back touchdowns for several weeks after he was injured for the rest of the season still. So, I mean, he's just a beast out there. I'm happy to get to him. The only consideration would be that a lot of the field, I think, is going there. So to your point about like the tournament, if you're in from last week and you're ahead, he's a strong chalk play, I think, is probably just a lot of people going to be clicking on it, and a pretty good bet for the top running back score. But you probably want to go in a different direction if you're trailing and you need to make up points. Hope that he fails when a lot of people are on him, and then get to, like an Eli Mitchell maybe, or somebody like that, or an Aaron Jones maybe, and pick up a little bit less ownership and go that route.
Yeah, so I think if I'm looking to go contrarian, I would be looking to go Cam Akers, just from a standpoint of we don't know what we're getting here from him. He's coming off a torn Achilles, and he looked really good last week, which here's also something that I tweeted about during the week when it came to Jerick McKinnon, who, by the way, I don't think McKinnon's going to play a big workload this week. We could, for all intents and purposes, for FanUp, I think we could ignore the Chiefs running backs. But I think one of the reasons McKinnon looked so good last week was not necessarily because he's some ultra talented running back. He was somebody who had a lot of promise when he was younger, who's dealt with a lot of injuries. But I think just the fact that he didn't play at all in the regular season, and then all of a sudden he pops up in the playoffs as having fresh legs when so many players are banged up, that's a massive advantage at the running back position. And Cam Akers has always been somebody who is really talented at running back. I think he probably would have crushed for fantasy this year had he not torn his Achilles. But he looked pretty explosive last week, and they were willing to give him 17 carries. I think we're going to see him as the lead back for the Rams this weekend. I think that Cam Akers could have a lot of success. There's a lot of volatility there because we didn't really see him play this year. But if I'm looking to go off the board at the running back position, it would be Cam Akers on FanUp. Chalk play being Derrick Henry. How do you differentiate between guys like Joe Mixon or Leonard Fournette, who I think that's going to be a very common decision point for people in terms of who they want as their second running back to choose from?
Yeah, and those are two guys that I like a lot. I got to a lot of them through the season. I think I would probably lean Mixon just based on the fact that we expect a little bit more running in that game in our game script adjusted data. We've got the Bucs at a 34.1% game script adjusted rush, and the Bengals and the Cincinnati's at a 40.4. So a little bit more running expected on the Cincinnati side of things. For perspective, on the Titans side, we've got them at 48.9% game script adjusted, leading the day. So again, it's just kind of that narrative where Henry's going to get fed the ball. But I think there could be just a lot of rushing plays in that Cincinnati-Tennessee game on both sides. I just get the feeling that one's going to turn into a little bit of a slugfest. And I think that's going to be a more interesting game than the guys on the last show thought it was. I'm kind of looking forward to that one for strange reasons. I'm not entirely sure why, but just compelling game to me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking forward to a lot of the games this weekend. Something else also. The game sucked so hard last week because almost all of them were blowouts. Every single game this weekend has a spread within 7 points. The biggest favorite of the weekend, Green Bay, is 6-point favorite over San Francisco. We should, at least based on these numbers, get more competitive games than we got last weekend. So let's move on over to the wide receiver position. I don't care if you're ahead, behind. I don't care. You have to play Cooper Kupp this weekend in FanUp when there's just no salary cap being considered. If you're going to differentiate a quarterback, differentiate a running back, I can't get away from Cooper Kupp considering that he never fails. Every single game for Cooper Kupp, if you look through his box score, is basically a solid game. Last week was one of his worst fantasy games of the season, and he has 17 fantasy points. There are no actual bad games in Cooper Kupp's game log. Play Cooper Kupp. Do you see it any differently?
No, not at all. I think it comes down to a question of whether you play him in the standard spot or the multiplier spot. And otherwise, he's got to be in your lineup 100% of the time. I mean, he's that good. He's that far ahead of all the other options on the board, that much more reliable. So, yeah, no brainer. Absolutely click him whenever you can play anybody that you want. Cooper Kupp should be in your lineup.
Yeah. And then just to reiterate the way that the flex spot works, which we'll talk about at the end with our favorite flex plays. The overall optimal flex play, it's Cooper Kupp by a mile. We have him projected for the most fantasy points of any skill position player. So the way the flex position works, you're taking a running back, a wide receiver, or a tight end, plug them into the flex spot, whatever their fantasy points are, you get 1.5x, which pretty regularly is going to be somebody like a Cooper Kupp, or in the regular season, maybe there'd be somebody like a Jonathan Taylor that fits into that spot. For all intents and purposes in the playoffs, I think you want to go with Cooper Kupp here. As for the other wide receivers, Terry, who are the other guys do you really gravitate towards in spots where you aren't rostering Cooper Kupp? Because obviously we have to roster other wide receiver, well, at least one other wide receiver who's not Cooper Kupp, potentially two if Kupp is in the flex spot.
Yeah, so it's a pretty nice luxury to be able to make a lineup that includes Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, and Tyreek Hill if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. That's one way to go. I think a lot of people would just kind of be naturally inclined to pick those three players off the top of the board as they're building lineups this way. So maybe you try and differentiate in game theory it a little bit. And if you're going to those guys, I certainly don't begrudge it, but it's difficult. You're going to be copying a lot of different lineups. And there are some star-studded options that are drawing less ownership projections on our other sites that we can kind of use to compare. So you can get to like Jamar Chase. He's projected for 14% DraftKings ownership, roughly half what these other guys are going off at. You can probably assume that's going to be around the same thing on a site like this. Debo, roughly half of the ownership of some of these other guys. Odell, similar story. Mike Evans, similar story. If I'm making that Brady pick at quarterback, I kind of like the idea of using Mike Evans in the multiplier spot and then putting like Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams in the wide receiver spots. You can stay chalky with the super premium wideouts in the wide receiver spots, play a lesser owned guy in the multiplier spot who correlates with my quarterback, and now we're off and running with a decent lineup build. So that's really the where the strategy comes in on FanUp, where you can kind of game theory some of these ideas. And I think there are a lot of different options at the wide receiver spot. This is really the spot where you can maybe differentiate with some upside. Like if you can get to Odell 12 to 15% owned when some of these other guys are 30% owned, I think that's got some value in it. So maybe if it's that oddball lineup where you're not including Cooper Kupp and you wanted to go Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, maybe you stick Odell in there because it's a direct pivot off of your Cooper Kupp and you're gaining leverage on those Cooper Kupp plays. So just little things that you can do like that are where some strategy can come into a site where you can pick, without salary, you can put whoever you want in your lineup. You still do need to, maybe game through these things.
So now I'll ask you, Cooper Kupp, we're playing him. Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, those are clearly the number 2 and number 3 wide receivers on this weekend. If you were to leave either Adams or Hill out of a lineup, which of them would you be more inclined to leave off?
Probably Hill. A little bit more volatile to me, where Adams is just kind of like the safety valve and the number 1 option and everything to Aaron Rodgers up there. Tyreek Hill doesn't necessarily play that role. There's just more options in that offense, be it on the wideouts that see some targets, or be it the big tight end in Travis Kelce. So I would probably lean keeping Adams in and give Tyreek the boot if I had to choose.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. And somebody else who people have been gravitating towards that I just kind of think is worth the point of discussion, because I've had so much issue with Deebo Samuel this year. A wide receiver is not really a wide receiver. I mean, he does a little bit of everything for the San Francisco 49ers, but it's so difficult to project a top wide receiver who just doesn't get targets in the passing game. So I get Deebo Samuel finishes with a good fantasy game last week, but he had 3 targets. He caught 3 passes for 38 yards. And then he had 10 carries, 72 yards. One of them scores a touchdown. It's really weird that we have a stud wide receiver who's relying on rushing touchdowns to get there from a fantasy standpoint. And I think he's super talented. I just don't totally buy into it. And I feel like I'm saying this all the time. And he's been good, but not great in a lot of these recent weeks. And I just get concerned that you're so reliant on this guy scoring a rushing touchdown. The game I always harp back to is I didn't play him in DFS, the game against the Minnesota Vikings. He ended up being one of the most popular plays on that slate in week 12. He had 1 catch for 12 yards, 6 carries for 66 yards and 2 touchdowns. So it ended up being an okay fantasy result. But I just look back at those games and say, not sustainable. So how do you view Deebo Samuel on a slate like FanUp?
Yeah, it's kind of through that same lens, right? It's a guy that I think is a better NFL weapon right now than he is a fantasy weapon necessarily. He's capable of putting up massive fantasy scores, but he's got to get there in odd ways. So for our rates-based stuff, for where we can land some reasonable expectation and have an ability to say, this is what this guy projects to do, it becomes a little bit of a difficult scenario. And you're playing, they were talking about it on the previous show, right? That San Francisco offense, very much a game manager kind of a quarterback. We've seen that over the years where these skill players that work with game manager type quarterbacks don't necessarily get that volume-based scoring, and they have to come up with different ways to get the ball in the end zone. Deebo sees all those bizarre opportunities, but yeah, the volume overall is somewhat limited compared to a lot of these other options. So he's definitely down a few pegs as compared to like a Mike Evans for me, even though they project very similarly, and Deebo's technically 0.3 ahead if we're going by DraftKings projections.
So move on to tight end. Now, once again, reminder to everybody, if you're signing up at FanUp for the first time, use the promo code Awesemo when you make in your account. Get $20 free in your account. Don't have to make any deposit. No risk to you. Sign up using that promo code Awesemo. Get $20. And there are some pretty big contests over at FanUp, including their big playoff contest, which had a $400,000 prize pool, $200,000 to first place. So moving on to the tight end position, and it's crazy. We are down to 4 games, 2 in each conference. So only 8 teams to choose from, and still better tight end options than we had in the majority of regular season full slates this year. Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Tyler Higbee are all on this slate. Terry, you can only play one of them. Who is it going to be?
You're leaving out Dawson Knox and CJ Uzomah from that list? Come on.
Yes.
These guys are good too.
Leaving him really, off. I know Dawson Knox got a couple of touchdowns last week. Leaving him off. He's not going to do it again.
Yes, it was CJ. It's those are the oddball targets. Those are your differentiator options, though, too. I mean, I do think tight end is a decent spot to differentiate just because of the touchdown hunting that we tend to do with a lot of it. You do have some target monsters, though, in Gronk, Kelce, and Kittle here. So those are guys that can soak up some of the offense in the right week. If I'm going to one of them, my favorite in a vacuum is Gronk, but I think the overall ownership is going to be all over Gronk and Kelce. So if you wanted to differentiate, maybe you go to a Kittle or a Higbee there and take a little bit of an ownership discount. I think any one of those guys is a strong option. Gronk, like I said, is my top guy for potential scoring. I think he could see a nice amount of targets and a nice amount of volume in the red zone.
And I think a lot of this is going to depend on who you play quarterback too. If you're going with Mahomes, I think you want Kelce as your guy at tight end. We talked about Brady as a contrarian option. In that case, I think you certainly want to go with Gronk. George Kittle is maybe a little bit of the forgotten man here. Here's the concern I have with George Kittle. The dude loves blocking. And we saw last week a game where he was actually really impactful. A lot of people who are just looking at the fantasy stats might looking to be like, hey, George Kittle sucked last week. Yeah, 1 catch for 18 yards and you get done for fantasy, but he was crushing in the blocking department, a big reason why the 49ers did have as much success they did in offense in that game. It's kind of hard to rely on him for fantasy, considering that he's been so heavily involved in the blocking as of late, receiving yards over the last handful of games. And this is coming off a stretch where, remember, we had George Kittle like 181 receiving yards, 151 yards, and 3 touchdowns over those games. And then last 4 games, 21, 29, 10, and 18 receiving yards. He's just not getting it done from a reception and yardage standpoint right now. So I'm more inclined to go with Gronk or Kelsey. So Terry, we're coming up near the end of our show here, but I think the most important thing to look at is going to be the flex spot. That is the spot on FanUp where you roster somebody in the flex spot. Has to be a running back, a wide receiver, a tight end. They get 1.5x their fantasy points. Cooper Kupp is clearly the number 1 option, and neither of us are going to disagree with that. If you're looking to play the chalk, you're going with Cooper Kupp. But if you're looking to be a little more contrarian in the flex spot, who is the guy that you're going to take as your a little bit of differentiation play in the 1.5x spot?
Yeah, so I think it works with the quarterback play that I said off the top that I kind of wanted to make, and that's Mike Evans. I mentioned it before when we were talking through the wide receivers. I think you gain a little bit if you correlate your flex play and you make a differentiated flex play like that. He saw 10 targets last week, made 9 catches, 117 yards, put 1 in the end zone. I have no issues going to Mike Evans. He's been a reliable fantasy option for years. I think the same thing works with Gronk if you wanted to put him in that spot instead of Evans, but I just think there's a little bit more advantage to differentiating that tight end in a different way after making these 2 differentiated plays. So it would be Evans for me.
It's going to be Derrick Henry for me. Really wide range of outcomes, but just think about the upside we saw from Derrick Henry in the regular season. He was an absolute fantasy beast. Here were his some of his stretch of games before he got hurt. From week 2 to week 6, 50 fantasy points, 22, 28, 34, 38. The upside in Derrick Henry is as high as everybody. People are going to be, I think, afraid to roster him in that 1.5x spot. There's certainly volatility, but if you're hunting for upside and you want to be different, I think Derrick Henry makes sense there. Guys, thank you for sticking around and watching the FanUp show. Don't forget, you can sign up using that promo code Awesemo, get $20 for free. Don't have to do anything else but download the app, put in the promo code Awesemo, and you sign up. Also, do us a favor on the way out, hit the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Lots more content coming up. Good luck this weekend.